Hello, welcome to the first week of this massive open online course, Introduction to PLSQL Program Units. You are viewing the fourth video of this week, Creating Stored Functions. In this video, you will learn about stored functions, how to create a stored function, and how to call it from a stored procedure. In continuation to our use case, where Jill developed an employee entry form in the HR administration system, let us understand how and where she can use a stored function. A stored function is similar to a stored procedure, except that it must return a value and it must be invoked or called from another expression or command. In the use case, you have seen that Jill figures out that the employee entry form must perform three tasks. First, validate the job ID. Second, if the job ID is valid, then enter all details of the employee. And third, if the job ID is not valid, then write the failed validations in the log file. To execute task 2 and task 3, that is, inserting valid employee records in the HR database and writing the failed validations in the log file, Jill created a stored procedure. However, before executing task 2 and task 3, Jill must validate the job ID. This is an important check which must precede task 2 and task 3. A stored function can validate the job ID and indicate the validation by returning a value such as true or false. For task 1, that is, to validate the job ID, Jill decides to create the stored function validate_job. In this stored function, she defines only one parameter, that is, p_job_id, as this function must check the validity of the job ID only. Let us look at the stored function in detail. Note that the structure of a stored function is similar to the structure of a stored procedure. The header section starts with the create or replace function keywords, followed by the function name, the parameters, and the return type. In this example, the function name is validate_job. The parameter defined is p_job_id, and the return type is a Boolean data type. Although a Boolean variable can hold a null value, this function cannot return a null value because the return statement states v_rec_count is greater than 0, which means v_rec_count can be either greater than 0 or less than or equal to 0. That is, it can return only true or false as response to the job ID validation. The declaration section begins with the keyword is. In this section, you declare the variables, cursors, and subblocks referenced in the execution and exception sections. Here, Jill declares the record count v_rec_count. It is a scalar variable declared to hold the number of records defined in the jobs table for the input job ID. The execution section begins with the keyword begin. It contains the logic to validate the job ID and increments the value of v_rec_count if the job ID is valid. Compile the stored function by clicking the Compile options in SQL Developer. Once the stored function is compiled, it is stored in the database. You can view it under Functions in the Connections pane in SQL Developer. After compiling a stored function, you can call it in a stored procedure. Now, let us see how Jill calls the stored function validate_job from the stored procedure add_emp. Jill modifies the stored procedure to call the stored function. In the execution section of the stored procedure add_emp, she calls the stored function validate_job. The stored function validates the job ID. If the job ID is valid, then the stored procedure inserts the employee details such as employee first name, employee last name, hire date, job ID, salary, and email ID into the employees table. And if the job ID is invalid, then the stored procedure raises the exception e underscore invalid underscore job and displays the message input job ID is invalid. It also writes the failed validation in a log file. The exception is declared in the declarative section of the stored procedure. Once Jill completes modifying the stored procedure so that it includes the call to the validate underscore job function, she compiles it by clicking Run in SQL Developer. Once the stored procedure is compiled successfully, the message procedure add underscore emp compiled is displayed and the stored procedure is available under stored procedure in the connections pane in SQL Developer. Now, Jill can use the stored procedure with the stored function as many times as she wants whenever she has to update the HR administration system. The stored procedure add underscore emp handles all the tasks in the workflow for updating the employee entry form in the HR administration system. The tasks in the workflow are: first, validating the job ID; second, entering all details of the employee if the job ID is valid; and third, writing the failed validations into a log file. Do you see how easy Jill's work has become after using the PLSQL subprograms, stored procedures, and stored functions? Let's recap what you have learned in this lesson. In this video, you should have learned how to create and compile a stored function and how to call a stored function from a stored procedure. To practice what you have learned, solve the assignment posted for this video on the OLL course page. Please post your questions, if any, in the course forum whose link is shown here. Thank you for watching this video.